guys, this is Emma, Lizzie, Arden, and Libby, and we're talking about the Transcontinental Railroad. So, around the 1830s, a man named George Stephenson invented the railroad. The railroad revolutionized transportation in America because it was faster and cheaper than traveling by wagon, which is what many people used to travel on the Oregon Trail. People started traveling on the Oregon Trail for the promise of gold, farming, and a better life in the West. But the Oregon Trail was very dangerous and it was very long. So the idea of a railroad that traveled along the same route and got you to the West was a great idea for all of those people that went for searching for a better life in the West. It would be cheaper, safer, and faster than anything else that they had.
The Pacific Railroad Act was proposed to Congress by a man named Asa Whitney. Congress had been thinking about improving America through better transportation and commissioned several surveys to find a good route for a transcontinental railroad. However, many railroad companies were scared to build a transcontinental railroad without federal help. Therefore, after much debate because of sectionalism, they passed this act, which provided federal subsidies to the railroad companies and designated the 32nd parallel as the initial route. This act named the Union Pacific and Central Pacific companies to build the railroad and was signed by Lincoln.
Now that the railroad was approved, it was time for construction to begin. The government signed two companies to start construction on the railroad. The Central and the Union Pacific Railroad Company started construction, but signing two companies to one job started a rivalry between the two because as one company built more tracks, it was paid more. The Union Pacific ended up covering 4 times as much as the Central Pacific, but that doesn't mean the labor was any less hard on either side. It was difficult and long. It took up to 6 years to complete because of complications such as attacks by Indians or having to stop and build settlements and housings.
Many immigrants were brought in to build tunnels. Of those immigrants, the Chinese workers did some of the most dangerous jobs. They used nitroglycerin to create the tunnels, and many of the workers died. These immigrants also worked for very little pay.
Transcontinental Railroad might sound like just one set of tracks, but actually there were many tracks built that were a part of this, all across America. Now, the first and main route was built in the middle of America, connecting the east to California. This was the one built by the Central and Union Pacific companies, and they met in Promontory, Utah. The northern route was led by Isaac I. Whitney. It was similar to the original route that was proposed by Asa Whitney, and the southern route, which was made in agreement with the Southern Pacific Railroad Company. It ran through Texas and up to California.
The railroad monopolies were created because railroads were very expensive to operate and create. They needed many expensive materials like glass and steel. To save themselves money, the railroads bought all of the companies they needed to run and became one management. The single company meant that there was only one option to travel by train, and that company decided the prices for everything.
One of the railroad companies that were to work on the Transcontinental Railroad was the Central Pacific Railroad Company. It was founded in 1861 by a group of merchants known as the Big Four. They are Huntington, Stanford, Hopkins, and Crocker. Through the Pacific Railroad Act, they were granted financial support to build the railroad and built from Sacramento to Promontory Summit. They had to build across the Sierra Nevada and would blast tunnels to do so. The other railroad company named to work on the Transcontinental Railroad was the Union Pacific Railroad. This company started building from Omaha, Nebraska, and overall laid 4 times more tracks than the Central Pacific Railroad did. At one point, the company went badly into debt and the building of the railroad was slowed. This company faced challenges like the Rocky Mountains and Native American attacks, which ultimately resulted in the natives being forced into reserves. The Union Pacific Railroad is still running today.
The credit mobilier scandal major stockholders of the Union Pacific formed a company, and they called it the Credit Mobilier of America, and they sold shares of construction to influential congressmen. And since the congressmen had shares in the railroad, they would then pass federal subsidies, which would be like large sums of money, so that they could keep up and continue to build the railways. And the railroad builders and the congressmen got really rich off of it, because since the congressmen held the shares, even if they were passing the subsidies, they would get the money back, and the railroad builders would obviously get money off of it because it was their railway and people would have to use it. The fall of the railroad. The western side of the United States became really dependent on the railroad, because it was kind of like the Mississippi River at this point in time, because it was so hard to get things in and out of the West, especially like it was really hard to get people in and out of the West, so it became harder to transport goods. And the monopolies became so large to the point of where they could finance political campaigns and like control who was in office, so that they could get the funding and backing that they needed. And one of the major like keys to the fall of the railroad was Munn versus Illinois. The Supreme Court ruled that the government could regulate businesses for the protection of the public interest, so that pretty much it outlawed monopolies, so that there was more competition and less, I'm the only person who has this, so you have to do it at my price. And with this, the single company monopolies pretty much crumbled, and the companies that had created the monopoly soon became victim to these regulation laws, because, as I said, they had the competition and the lower prices, and they had to actually like be able to finance themselves rather than just name a price. And due to this, parts of the railroad became inactive because more efficient lines were opening up at a lesser like cost and things like that. So it was just a lot of that contributed to the fall of these large companies and the railroad itself. Some important people that need to be remembered are the Big Four. Huntington represented the company in the East, while Stanford represented the company in the West. Crocker did construction, and Hopkins helped direct the company. Another important person, or some more important people, are Theodore Judah, Asa Whitney, and Thomas Durant. Theodore Judah got financial banking from the Central Pacific, and he found federal support through the Pacific Railroad Association. He also surveyed the route through Sierra Nevada that the railroad would go. Asa Whitney, he envisioned the route and submitted the proposal that would like help build it. And Thomas Durant, he established the Credit Mobilier, and he was like the major driving force behind the railroad to like get it done.
The Transcontinental Railroad revolutionized transportation and killed the Oregon Trail because there was no more need for it. It also increased the speed of western expansion and decreased the cost of traveling. It influenced the Pony Express, which was a mail service. It also caused the economy to grow exponentially, and Wall Street was created to help organize the massive amounts of money. It also created other monopolies in the glass and steel industry, which were only shut down by the Munn versus Illinois case.